Kristo Kaarmann, co-founder and CEO of TransferWise. One of the biggest companies today, growing very quickly, reinventing how we think of cross-border payments in general. Kristo, tell us the story. You and your partner, both in London, trying to solve this very simple problem of remittances to Estonia.
Yes, exactly. So when I moved to London about 10 years ago, I had a very nice problem in my hands. I had too much salary. I started working at Deloitte at the time, and the Christmas bonus came in. I had nowhere to put the money, so I wanted to move it to exactly. Sorry. I wasn't going to do that. I was 26 years old.
Okay.
So I decided I'm going to put it on my savings account and earn, maybe it was like 1% a year on this. But when I went to HSBC then and just made an international payment to my Estonian bank account. But what I found was that about 500 euros were missing somewhere on the way. So I contacted HSBC, asked if guys did a mistake or something. And then I realized that actually that happens on every single cross-border transfer, where the bank just uses a pretty random exchange rate. Although it's not random, it's the real exchange rate that you see in Reuters, plus then another 5% on top of that. So that's how banks make money on international payments.
Yeah.
And what we find is that then when I didn't really quite like this, so I had a friend at the time who was living in London, as I was, but his salary was still in euros. He was paid by Skype in Estonia. And what he started doing was, whenever I needed to send money to Estonia, I looked at the real exchange rate, put the amount of pounds that we agreed onto his account in the UK, so just make the UK to UK transfer, and then according to the exchange rate, calculated how many euros would he need to move from his account in Estonia to my account in Estonia. So we actually never moved the money across borders, but made a peer-to-peer transaction among ourselves.
And was this Tavet?
Yeah, so he's now my co-founder, Tavet, and since then, that was just a solution for ourselves, and we had a small group of friends. Whenever we needed to do the other side, we called up the group. But then in 2011, we figured, it's not our problem alone. It's a global problem. And we launched with a simple blog post on TechCrunch that says, here's a website built by two Estonians. You can use it to send money to the UK or to the Eurozone. And you know what? 15 minutes later, someone put £2,000 on our account to send to France. And then later, some people in Europe put money on our Euro account to send to England, and we had a
problem in your heads because you now needed to find liquidity on the other side.
Well, the liquidity was provided by our users because we were just really matching the money and not moving it across borders.
And it was that easy. Like the system wasn't robust yet, and the security.
The security, everything was there. It was just really very simple. It was very robust, but also very simple. And yeah, of course, we got licensed even before we started, and we just had so much demand. People were writing to us saying, "Hey, I was a student. I was doing this crazy scheme in Canada, like buying stock on the US exchange and then selling it on the Canadian exchange just to get the other currency." So we saw there's just so much
different uses of not
exactly.
just remittance, but all kinds of things that people use it for, right?
Exactly.
So you were able to create those two communities. Now, the interesting thing is about anyone who does anything to do with transactions on the web, especially if it's supply chain related, they have to fake it at first. They have to show that there are transactions taking place. You didn't need to do that.
Not really. We just had it on the first day.
Because it's money. So
we had it on the first day. People are trusting us on the first day, and there's just so much demand. I think it was just driven by demand. So next week people are asking, can I send money to the US? Can I send money from Canada? Can I send money to Singapore? And the rest of the story for 7 years has been just adding more countries and working on the demand.
There are any number of Estonians, Kazakhs, and former Eastern Europeans living in London today, trying to set up remittance businesses of the same sort that you seem to have able to even scale. So why were you able to scale and so many of the others sort of like never seem to take off the ground? Maybe their corridor is smaller, the technology is not well thought through, or?
So the corridors, almost every corridor in every currency is big enough. The corridors are big, just the question is, I think we have, over time, figured really out what users want. And they want three simple things. They want money to get there fast, they want transparency, they want to know exactly how much they're paying, they don't want to have a random exchange rate. So I think we were the only ones, and still are, very few ones who are pioneering this. So money on TransferWise always exchanges at the same exchange rate that you see on Reuters, always. And we charge a very transparent fee. And this is what users really, really appreciate. So now that you can move money nearly instantly, you can see what you're paying for it, and it's not much.
And there were the incumbents at that time. There were the MoneyGrams of the world, there were the WorldPay and all of the others. So what was your proposition in a crowded marketplace?
I do think in retrospect, it was really transparency was the biggest proposition. And of course we were cheaper than anyone else, and quite soon we were faster than anyone else as well. But I think the real differentiator from the beginning has been transparency. So the fact that you
transparency of the exchange rate?
Correct.
And the fees, right?
Correct.
So, okay.
So you really know exactly how much you're paying, and you start trusting the product because you know that they're not trying to rip you off.
Okay, and that's for remittances. What about payments? Like if you take an average credit card payment and today the credit card companies tell you like if you want to pay the local currency or the currency where you're trading or your home currency, right? So and they give you a rate, and then if you Google the rate, you realize that there's that same difference in a way. That's payments. How's payments different from remittance that way? Like, do you see yourself eventually going into payments so that you are a replacement to Visa and MasterCard?
It's a very good question. So let's just put some context around this. So first of all, payments compared to remittance, as you call it, is quite small. Like cross-border element of it. Payments is huge on its own, but the cross-border payments is, not that big as cross-border money movement. If you think of all the import and export that needs to happen on trade. But of course, our users get the same frustration when the dynamic currency conversion shows up on the POS terminal, and they're super frustrated with it. So what we've launched, as we're about to launch in Europe and rolling out in the rest of the world, is a borderless account, an account that holds 28 different currencies. You get local account numbers in US, UK,
that sounds
Euro.
So suspiciously crypto.
Has nothing to do with crypto. It's completely the normal currencies that we're used to. So that borderless account.
But it's your token. It's a token.
It's as much as our token as an HSBC account is an HSBC token.
But it's a multi-currency token.
No, it's not a multi-currency token. There's actually actual currencies.
Okay.
So you can hold US dollars.
You can hold multiple currencies. That's what you're saying. Yeah?
Exactly.
Okay, without having tokenized it yet.
Yes.
Okay.
And the beauty of it is for businesses. So if you're a business in Singapore, you can get this borderless account, and you get local account numbers in the US, in UK, in Australia, in Germany, so that when you charge your customers in the US, you'll put the US account number on your invoice, and you receive dollars directly into the borderless account.
So do you then set up a Nostro account in the US? This is a personalized Nostro account, which is
correct.
Okay,
correct.
And you're willing to do that for the customer, which
it's 5 clicks away from anyone who wants to do it. Go through the KYC process, and then they get local accounts anywhere in the world. And this is live. We have amazing demand for it already. It's live in most countries in the world, and these accounts at the moment are Eurozone, UK, Australia, and US. And we're adding more to them. but you can even use it in Singapore. Then when the money arrives on your US account, it shows up as US dollars in your multi-currency account, and we don't charge anything for that. And then it's up to you. If you want to pay, if you have bills or suppliers in US, you can pay dollar right away. If you need a Singaporean dollar to pay salaries, you just convert it into dollars here and pay salaries from that account.
And have it transferred into a local bank account in Singapore.
You can do that as well.
And all that process is free.
All that process is free, and on the conversion, we use the Reuters exchange rate and charge the same fee as we would during the transfer.
And so what's the business model in the back of it? It's like, where do you make your revenue? It's like the volume?
There is volume, and that is what matters. So what we find is we can lower our fees gradually as we grow volume. And we've been profitable for a year already. So there's enough fees because even the fees are tiny. There's so much volume that we can cover. We can cover the cost of payments.
If it was that easy, if transparency was all it was about, why aren't the others doing it? Like, why is it not the critical success factor? It's like anyone in remittance just needs to be transparent.
I think it is, actually. I think it is.
So you have a lead time or a window of opportunity that's going to close on you very quickly because the others will figure it out as well. And you now have scale, and your investors like you because
we're doing really well.
Again, that includes some very interesting people. You've got Richard Branson, Peter Thiel. I mean, people who know payments, who know disruption and stuff like that. What are your investors' biggest worries when they think about where you're taking this?
So they know that the opportunity that we're looking at is enormous, but they also know that we've got a strategy that is very independent. As we're already profitable, we can kind of grow and actually reduce our prices as we grow. So we just did that in Singapore end of last year. We did that today in Japan. We dropped our prices by about 30% at most routes, and we can keep doing that because it's just a scale economy. It's just a lot of scale, and as long as you do the right thing for the user, you will get more scale.
Okay. At the moment, it's small value. What is the per ticket item that you generally transmit, and is that getting bigger? At which point will you become small business? At which point you become corporate?
I mean, we have small businesses and corporates using TransferWise, which happily we have people who pay, even from the early days on, do payroll in like 27 different currencies. People who connect through the API. We have banks using TransferWise. So we're moving £1.5 million per month, £1.5 billion per month already through the rails, and this is only getting bigger. We have people who buy expensive properties, in millions of dollars in one transaction, but also we have people who pay back a sandwich they got with a friend, and that's only $5. So it's complete variety. I think anything that you would use your bank for, you'll know for a fact that the bank would let you down on the foreign exchange. You just use TransferWise.
I guess so if the first critical success factor is transparency, the second is actually liquidity on either side, right? It's not even the technology. You haven't arrived at the technology yet. So somehow you seem to have created liquidity on multiple currencies. Were some countries easier than others? Were some currencies easier than others, and some currencies that you won't touch because it's too difficult?
It's a very good question, and you're right to put it this way. What World Bank has found is very interesting. There are studies that show the most expensive currencies to use are the ones that are closed or managed by the central bank or the government. And so let me actually give you an example. We were offering transfers to Nigeria in Naira, and about a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, we actually closed down that route because we saw that there was a real banking system with the central bank established exchange rates, fixed exchange rates, and then there's actually a shadow economy that, because we're a legit business, we can't really be involved in, but everyone else in Nigeria was involved in the kind of the shadow exchange business. So then we just moved out of Nigeria overall, because no one would be using the real system, because the cost was like 20% off, or the price of naira was 20% off. But then over time, the Nigerian central bank also got on top of their game and opened up the currency slowly, so that we actually entered the market again about 3 months ago, and it's done amazingly without any complications that we want.
So between you and Tabit, which one is the currency expert, or which one has the instinct for FX?
We don't, well, neither of us actually, because we really don't take positions in FX. We don't use it as a trading or speculate. Exactly. We don't want to carry FX risk, and we don't want our users to carry FX risk. And we don't really support any type of kind of currency speculation. That's not the goal. The goal is to make it really cheap and easy for people who want to move currencies across borders.
And as you build the rails, there's a temptation to add a lot more technology around it, right? There's crypto, there is blockchain, stuff like that. Do those things interest you at this time, or is distractions?
It definitely interests me intellectually, and I spend quite a bit of time playing with. I'm a developer myself, so I can kind of build stuff on crypto, but we haven't really found anything for our users that would make use. So crypto doesn't really help payments go faster or cheaper than we can already do in the
because the Ripple will tell you that well, if you hold your crypto, then you don't have to worry about this liquidity on either side. That they will solve that problem for you. And it's just adding another intermediary in the process.
Maybe.
Do the banks talk to you? Like, do they come after your floats?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the banks love us, and some banks have gone really smart. So I was just telling a story on stage about, it's happened about 3 years ago. There's a small currency called forint in Hungary. Okay. And we saw that there's lots of customers coming to use TransferWise in Hungary, and we asked them, like, how did you hear about us? They said, our bank suggested to use TransferWise, and we were really surprised about that, because usually, we point out all the flaws that banks have in foreign currency, and then we learned there's a small bank in Hungary who realized every time they do a cross-border transfer for the user, it's a terrible experience and actually very costly for themselves. So it made so much more sense for them to train their front office staff in branches that if someone walks in and wants to send money to the US or the UK, they would teach them how to set up a TransferWise account on their own and fund it and make the transfer happen this way. So we didn't know about this, and that's how they just got all their users to use TransferWise.
But then, the banks will start saying, at this point, KYC comes in. There's an issue of how robust is your KYC, and if you did create connectivities, there are issues there. I mean, then the compliance cost goes up. Has that been creeping up at all?
Not really, because that's also a matter of scale. I mean, we have pretty enormous compliance operations, and
how many people do you have so far?
We're over 900 people now in 9 countries. So there's a lot of people behind this operation, and a lot of kind of sophistication goes into both transaction monitoring and also.
Then you don't have anybody left for development work. So
we'll have plenty of left for development work as well. As you see, as we're kind of adding more currencies, this is what we do.
No, because what I'm trying to suggest here is how do you keep your organization small enough to ace the game, and yet you need to have more and more people because of the operational costs.
Absolutely, and I think the way that it works is, you will always need to do a few things manually when it comes to transaction monitoring or compliance. But then again, a lot of those things you can do really smart, and you can build algorithms that do part of the work for you, whether it's relying on machine learning or
is that what you're doing? I mean, are
Yeah,
you keeping
absolutely.
your compliance costs down by using machine learning and
A lot of that is just doing the things so much smarter than a lot of others did who set this up in like 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, but why aren't the MoneyGrams of the world doing, automated, KYC, for example? If you go and pay to an average remittance company in most countries, firstly, they need you to show up. Yours is probably done online, right? And secondly, the documentation required and stuff like that, and all that process. I mean, many still operate that way. How are you able to convince regulators to accept your algos and the way in which you see compliance?
I mean, the regulators are seeing that the way we do these things are actually working better than putting armies of people on the same tasks. So regulators, even they watch closely how we do these things, and they come and audit us, every now and then. I've probably had a lot of audits in just the last year. So this is very kind of normal for us. We're now licensed in like 42 countries around the world. So we have to please the Japanese regulators the same time as the Ohio regulators in the US, right? So I think when you ask about the remittance players, you also should appreciate that their business is very different. They're dealing with cash. Cash that is harder to track, cash that you actually do need to deliver somewhere physically. And I think that's, as long as it's needed, and it's going to be needed for a little while, especially in the more developing countries, it's a hard business and actually very costly. So I completely understand why Western Union and MoneyGram have to charge the margins that they charge.
At the same time, they're looking at you, say, hey, if only we did what you're doing, we'll look like a much more customer-friendly, business. So it's a matter of time before, the differences start getting.
I guess so, but I think that's more of the question: how long do people use cash, and whether we see more developing economies moving to maybe bypassing bank accounts in traditional sense and moving to PayTM or moving to M-Pesa or some of these digital wallets, where just the life becomes a little bit more digital, and then also cheaper for people when they want to move money across borders.
So do you have conversations with M-Pesa?
We're using M-Pesa now. So if you send money to Kenya,
it goes straight into
your M-Pesa account.
Right, and so you're account agnostic. It doesn't have to be a bank account. It can be.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't know what is the difference between a bank account and an M-Pesa account. Both hold money, so we can deliver to those, and we would.
Okay. Cards. Why are you going into cards at either end of the transaction? And which countries are you doing cards, and why?
We use cards wherever appropriate. People often, especially for smaller transactions under like 2,000 euros or 2,000 pounds, people would use credit cards or mostly debit cards actually in Europe to fund the transfers. And what that does is actually beautiful. So if you're a user in, I don't know, Poland or Italy, and you're sending money to the UK and you're funding with a card, it's quite likely that your payment will arrive in 20 seconds onto some bank account where you need it, and you can start using
EU
it.
regulations, right? So and then there's no fee element as well, and that's regulated. So
no, it's not so much about the regulation, but it's just the speed of the networks that you can achieve with cards. And in the UK, there's a faster payment system that we're directly connected to, so that makes just things really, really fast. And the experience for someone who moves money from one country to another and sees that happen in 20 seconds, it's amazing.
Yes, but the banks on the other side make put a fee on that transaction, so the cost becomes a little higher.
You're right. So debit cards still carry some interchange that is expensive for the users, and that's why users don't tend to use it for large amounts. But for smaller amounts, the fee is not that high. It's only 20 basis points, 0.2% in Europe.
Well, tell me a bit more about Mission Zero.
Aha, exciting. Mission Zero is our way to talk about why we're doing what we're doing. So going back to the story I told you how Tavid and I got started with it, we thought it was kind of outrageous that for something as simple as moving like email from one country to another, it's not really much more complicated than moving an email from Singapore to Singapore, moving it from Singapore to Hong Kong. So why is that not the same with money, that whenever you move money cross-border it becomes prohibitively expensive and it becomes really slow? So the origin of the Mission Zero is that we should be able to move money nearly at zero cost between any two countries and currencies and nearly instantly. So in no time and at no cost.
What makes you get there? What do you need as a supporting philosophy to reach that? Because number one, minimize the intermediaries, right?
Absolutely.
Is that what it is?
I thought you had more than number one.
I can imagine 2 or 3, but you're the man doing it, so.
No, so you're right. So any intermediaries in the process, they're likely to slow it down. Actually, that's even more important, and charge a fee of what they're doing. And then the question is, can we replace these intermediaries with technology? So the beauty of technology is, quoting my investor Mark Andreessen, is software is eating the world, but it's definitely eating the banking. If you can replace things with software, then at scale it becomes really, really cost efficient. And moving money really is moving information. And the idea that you can replace people and intermediaries with software will eventually help us drive the cost down and speed.
But when it comes
up
to FX and money, there's this whole cartel that runs the wholesale side, right? And they'll be looking very seriously at someone like you and saying, at which point do we put a stop to this guy? When will you become wholesale?
Well, when you say cartel, who do you have in mind?
Well, the 60 banks that sit on the FX rates worldwide, basically.
Oh yeah, sure, but they they trade with each other, and the same way as they trade with us. They just happen to be market makers on the foreign exchange, and we're massive customers.
There's no reason why a small bank in Indonesia, for example, shouldn't use you to move their money, because
and they're starting to do that. So I don't know if you're familiar. In Europe, there's a bank number 26.
Yep.
So similar to the story I told about Hungary, when they started up, they had a choice. Of course, their users need to be able to send money not just to Germany, but outside of Germany. And they had a choice of integrating a standard SWIFT and correspondent banking network, or integrate TransferWise. And guess what they did?
Well,
that would be crazy to integrate SWIFT in this day and age if you're just starting up. So surely they integrate TransferWise. Now it's really beautiful experience actually, because when you're inside the app, you connect the TransferWise app and the number 26 app, and then you can create a transfer on the number 26 app in their banking app, and it will appear in TransferWise as well. So it's kind of doesn't really matter where you use the service from or what's your UI or the channel. It just appears in TransferWise and processes as normal TransferWise transaction.
Yeah, so to get to point zero, what has to happen in technology? What are you looking for in terms of a breakthrough?
I think more so than technology. That technology is kind of getting there, and it's more, I would say, the local infrastructures need to be improving in terms of moving money between banks and then other players. So we have this great story in the UK where the old batch system got replaced with what's called faster payments, and that means that any money movement between banks and even us is instantaneous, 24/7. And now we're seeing other parts of the world. So Australia is launching NPP is their version of that. Singapore is quite advanced actually in this sense. US is quite behind, so they have a lot of work to do to move from a daily ACH process to real time. So we see that a lot of work needs to still happen in parts of the world to get the local infrastructure in place, and then it's really important when that happens. And I think UK government and regulator learned that lesson really well, to open that infrastructure up not just to the big banks, but to others who are bringing the customer benefit from making those immediate connections at a really low rate.
Is there a temptation to provide that kind of service where the local banking system is really back, and something that TransferWise can work domestically, or are you very focused on cross-border?
We're really focused on cross-border. We see that this is an enormous problem to solve, and we're just in the beginning of it. Even moving like 1.5 billion a month is just being in the very beginning of it.
Kristo, it's been lovely speaking to you, and to just understand that it's such a simple story is in itself legendary actually. So what you're doing is amazing. Actually, one more question. Competitors?
I wish we had more. I think banks have had this market for a long time, and they haven't really treated their users transparently. So the more we have transparent competition, and I would love if someone is able to do some of these routes better than we do, we would recommend them wholeheartedly, because I think users deserve to have the best option available.
This is a continuing conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.